Hi, this is Chris Smith with Local Joe's. At Local Joe's, we help local business. Hi, this is Chris Smith with Local Joe's.
This is City Pulse Newsmakers, a weekly look at the issues and the people behind them in Greater Lansing. Brought to you by City Pulse, Lansing's weekly alternative newspaper. And now, here's your host, City Pulse publisher, Burl Schwartz.
Good morning. Our guest today is a remarkable man who is the first Supreme Court justice who is blind. But harder than that, he's a Democrat who got elected statewide in Michigan. He is Justice Richard Bernstein. Thank you so much for being on our show today.
Oh, I have to tell you, I am so delighted to be here, and I have been so looking forward to it. And thank you for having me on. And I got to tell you, I love City Pulse. So I'm a very big fan. So I have been looking forward to this like you can't believe.
Okay. Well, Your Honor, your slogan last year was a stroke of genius in your campaign, blind justice. How did that come to you?
Well, you know, I insisted on using the idea of blind justice because if you're going to run as a blind person, people have to feel comfortable with you. And what I had to do was I had to run 2 elections at the same time. Number one, I had to show people that it was okay to elect a blind person, that I could do the job, that I could perform in the position. Well, at the same time, I still had to win a traditional election.
Right.
So we literally had 2 elections that were going on simultaneously. And I felt the idea of using blind justice created a sense of connection with people. I wanted people to ask about it. I wanted people to inquire about it. And I thought it was the kind of slogan that you could have fun with. You know, people would hear blind justice and they would kind of laugh. And I thought that was perfect because it allowed for people to feel comfortable with blindness to the point that they would ask the questions that they needed to ask to feel okay about allowing for someone like myself to serve in this position.
And I guess it's important, too, to let people know that you are comfortable with it.
Indeed. Because, look, you can't be blind, run for statewide office, and not talk about it. Because otherwise what's going to happen is that people are going to say, oh, wait a minute, you know, this person's blind. I have all these doubts. I have all these concerns. I have all these issues. You know, I'm not sure. Is it really safe to vote for him? I don't know. Can he do the job? How's he going to do this if he can't see? So basically, if you don't address it, then people are going to be very concerned about it. And as a result, you're going to lose. So it had to be addressed. But the way that you address it was critical because at the end of the day, what this really comes down to is connection. It's all about connection. And that's why I love our state. I love our state. I went all across our state, both peninsulas, from every city to every county. And when you really look at kind of what politics is about people and having an ability to connect and relate to people. And so that's what the trick in this election was getting people to feel comfortable with me as a person, with me as a blind person, and with me as their proxy sitting on the bench.
So just as you had to help people become comfortable with your disability, how did you become comfortable with your disability as you were growing up?
Oh, that's a wonderful question. I'm just kind of a very spiritual person. And I just really believe that everything happens for a purpose, everything happens for a reason, and that every one of us is created with a true sense of mission, that we're put here for a reason, and that we're part of a bigger and grander and more noble plan. We might not know what it is, we might not appreciate what it is, we might not even be able to comprehend what it is, but you simply have to believe that you're part of something bigger or grander than yourself, and it really allows for life to be made easier because it becomes a life that is filled with purpose.
And your family business, of course, is law. Why did you choose to go into the family business?
Well, I went into law because I really feel that law is the one thing that can be transformative in the lives of people. law can impact people, law can affect people, and law can result in tremendous change in the lives of people. And I saw what the law can do. And it's interesting because, you know, when I went to law school and graduated, I came back to my dad's law firm and I established our public services division. And our public services division worked on an exclusively pro bono basis. We never charged for legal representation. And we took the cases that nobody else would take, and we absorbed all the costs of the litigation. And through the public services division, you were able to see how life was made better for people. I remember my first major case was a fight with the city of Detroit, a fight with Mayor Kilpatrick, which led to, you know, a groundbreaking precedent that affected public transportation on a national basis to allow for people with disability to have access. Aviation was another huge case that we took on to allow for people with disabilities to have rights that they didn't have to be able to travel across the country and across the world. That's an example of how the law is a catalyst for change. And if used properly, if used correctly, and if done for the right reasons, there's no greater profession than to become a lawyer, because there's no greater profession that allows for such incredible, significant change. I always remember when people would say to me, and whenever someone's a young law student, they always say, oh, great, that's what we need, just, you know, another lawyer. But you know what? We do need more lawyers. We need more caring lawyers, kind lawyers, and we need lawyers who are doing it because they really want to make the world a better place.
I'm prejudiced toward lawyers because I have twin daughters who are both lawyers.
Exactly.
But as you were growing up,
Yes.
did you ever consider another profession?
No, I did not. I always knew this is what I wanted to do. I always believed this is what I wanted to do. And you know what? Being a blind person and being a Supreme Court justice, it has such a wonderful impact and such a wonderful effect. And I'm really so optimistic about the incredible difference that we're going to make. Because, you know, the challenge, I think, for most disabled people, and I think this is important to point out, 85% of the blind population is currently unemployed. That's a really staggering statistic. 85% of the blind population is unemployed. Now, that isn't because blind people aren't hardworking. It's not because they're not passionate. It's not because they're not hard workers. It's not because they wouldn't be incredible if given the opportunity. It's socioeconomic. And that's something that is always of great concern to me, is the fact that, you know, when people look at me, they say, oh, wow, it's great that he's blind and he did all these things. But I think it's very, very important that people always know and understand that the only reason that I get to have the chance to do what I'm doing is socioeconomic. If I did not come from the family background that I came from, that had the affluence that we had to allow for the best schools and the best of everything to give me the chance to become a lawyer and to give me the chance to do what I love doing, this never would have happened. So I think the real challenge that we have to focus on is, and I think this is critical, if I didn't come from the family that I came from and have the background that I came from and have the blessings of affluence that I was blessed with, I would be part of the 85% unemployed. There's not a question, not a question. There's no reason that I would be having the chance to do what I'm doing right now. And I think it's just always important to point that out, that but for the socioeconomic background I came from, I would be a part of the 85% of the blind community who is currently unemployed. And that's why I'm dedicating my life to trying to enhance and make life better for folks, because I was given certain opportunities and resources that others were not given.
Are there simple things society can do, or are there complicated, expensive things, or a combination of those things?
I think it's a combination, but I think what it really comes down to is giving somebody a chance, is giving someone an opportunity. That's really what it comes down to. It comes down to believing in someone. That's the strongest thing. My high school guidance counselor was a gentleman by the name of Lou Ruggiero. I went to college because of Mr. Ruggiero, because he believed that I should be given a chance. He believed that I should be given an opportunity to attend school. And that, for me, made all the difference. So I think that it's the idea that there are people who walk among us who are different. There are people who walk among us who are challenged. It's the idea of recognizing the potential and the ability, and also from a religious perspective, it's the idea of recognizing that every single person has been created in the glory of the Creator and in the glory of God for a mission, for a purpose, and for a reason. And it's simply allowing for people to help with that journey, to allow for them to fulfill the purpose that they were sent here to do. So what I think it really comes down to is, it simply comes down to recognizing that people with challenges, people with disabilities, people who face struggle, if you simply provide them an opportunity, if you provide them a chance, that's why we're doing this whole tour with the Lieutenant Governor. It's a wonderful jobs tour. And we're traveling all across the state of Michigan. Because if you can get employers to say, you know what, here's someone who I usually would not have hired, because they're different, it's unique, it might be a challenge, but I'm going to provide this opportunity. I'm going to give them a chance. I'm going to go and work a little harder to create an opportunity that I otherwise would not have created.
But
that's transformative.
You have not succeeded because simply somebody gave you a chance. You've succeeded through a tremendous amount of hard work. And I want to find out more about what you do to be successful, but I want to ask you if you think the average blind person is going to be able to work as hard as you have.
Absolutely. Well, first off, no one blind person can represent all blind people, just as no one disabled person can ever represent all disabled people. Everyone has their own story. Everyone has their own uniqueness. Everyone is created in their own different way and experiences life in their own different manner. But I do believe, if speaking in a general term, that absolutely, because what happens when you have a disability, whether it's blindness, whatever it is getting that level of acceptance, finding someone who's willing to give you a job, finding someone who's willing to give you an opportunity. When someone does that, you are so energized, you are so excited, you are so enthused, you appreciate it that much more, because these are opportunities that we're never usually given. So when someone provides you this opportunity, that level of excitement, that level of enthusiasm, and that level of willingness to say that I am going to do the absolute best job humanly possible is palpable, because you take nothing for granted. I'll just tell you very quickly, when I was at Northwestern, it was in 1998. Northwestern had a 100% job placement.
This 100%. Was your law school?
Back when I was in law school. 100% of the people who graduated from Northwestern found jobs at major law firms. Back in 1998, I graduated in 99, but you interviewed summer of 98. I interviewed with 65 law firms that came on campus. Of the 65 law firms who came on campus to interview, I would love to have you guess, how many do you think extended me a callback? Not an offer, but just a callback to come back to the law firm to talk with them more.
I don't know.
Zero. Not a single one. And when I talked to career services about it, they said, look, it's because they're reticent. It's different. They're not used to this. And it's just easier for them to move on to the next person than to focus on you.
How many blind lawyers are there in the United States, do you know?
Very few.
Yeah.
I don't have a specific number because it's hard to quantify. What I can tell you is that, what I can tell you is that when I went to Northwestern, I'm pretty sure I was the only blind person to have gone to Northwestern in the last probably 30, 40 years. So you're not talking about a lot. I would say that the numbers of blind people who are in the practice of law are relatively small. I don't have a specific number, but I would say that it is not substantive based on the matriculation and numbers of people who you'll find kind of currently in law school today.
And you've had to use memory to an unbelievable extent. Is that a gift? Is that something you developed?
It's what you have to do. It's just the way you have to focus, and it's what you have to do to get the job done. When I was in law school, I had to memorize and internalize everything. A law school fact pattern would be 15 pages, and you'd have to issue spot. I would memorize and internalize the entire fact pattern before having a chance to even answer the question. So you'd have a reader that would read the fact pattern 15 to 20 times. I would commit that entire fact pattern to memory, and then I would start dictating my answer to the scribe. When I was in practice, I want you to imagine, if you will, the simple fact that when I was in federal court, arguing cases, you would have maybe 15, 20, 25, 30 cases that were relevant to your position that you were arguing in federal court. I would have to commit all of those cases totally to memory to be able to argue in an effective manner. But in addition to memorizing the cases that were relevant to my position that I was arguing for, I had to memorize the 25, 30 cases that the other side was arguing, that was in their four corners of the brief, in order to argue effectively. So I'd go to federal court having memorized 40, 50 cases and being able to argue every one of those cases. And I want to tell you something. If you're fighting with an airline, if you're fighting with a city, if you're fighting with a university, nobody cares that you're disabled. Nobody cares that you're blind. You either are prepared and you're able to argue effectively and successfully, or you lose. If the judge turns to you and says, you know, Mr. Bernstein, you know, is Delta covered under the Air Carrier Access Act or the American Disabilities Act based on, you know, this specific case? If you're not able to answer the question the judge is asking you on your feet when you're in court, your clients lose. It's over. You either know the material, you're either able to argue the material, you're either able to do it well, or you lose. It's just that simple. There is no sympathy, there is no pity when you go into court just because you're blind, especially when you take on cases where the stakes are this high that affect people this great.
Do you find yourself impatient with lawyers who are not 100% prepared?
Actually, it's the exact opposite. And it's interesting, I'll tell you, it's the exact opposite. Because what they say, it's interesting, I was in a horrible, horrible life-changing accident. Now, in addition to being born blind, when I was in New York City, I was getting ready for my 18th marathon, and I was walking in Central Park to prepare. I had memorized the loop that goes around the park, so I was just walking in Central Park to prepare, and I got struck by a bicyclist who was going at a speed of in excess of 35 miles an hour. And the injury was catastrophic, and I had to live at Mount Sinai Hospital for over 10 weeks. And the pain was the likes of which that it's impossible to understand or even begin to describe. And what's interesting is there's an old saying that the nurses would always say, that people who are kind and good-natured and loving and gentle become more kind when they go into the hospital. And I think that's a really interesting thing, that people who, it's your real persona shows. So conversely, people who are maybe mean or difficult and then have an accident become meaner and more difficult. And I think the same thing is for judges. People who are kind before they have an opportunity to go onto the bench become nicer and kinder when they're in the position, versus people who have an attitude or an ego who get into the position, their ego and attitude is only accentuated. It only gets greater. It only becomes more enhanced. So for me, I am actually developing my persona towards this is that I think judges should be kinder to lawyers and nicer to lawyers. I think that is a critical thing. There is no reason that a lawyer coming before a judge should ever be yelled at, should ever be embarrassed, should ever be made to feel bad, and there is absolutely no circumstance ever that a judge should ever embarrass an attorney in front of their client. Ever. So in fact, whenever someone comes to the Supreme Court, before asking a question, I always start off by saying, "Good morning, counsel. It's a great pleasure to welcome you to the Supreme Court this morning." And the reason for that is it sets a nice tone. It sets a conversational tone. It sets a kind tone. And at the end of the day, you can still ask the same question that you want to ask, but you can ask it in a tone which is a gentle, warm, kind, good-natured tone and still get the same answer to the information that you're looking at. You don't have to take a difficult tone in order to give someone a hard time for no reason.
You brought up the accident in New York, and that you were preparing for your 18th marathon. And you have also, you're an Ironman.
That's correct.
And I take iron, but it's not the same thing. But I wanted to find out more about the athletic side. You know, how important has that been in your development?
Athletics is a spiritual connection, because we're all looking for a sense and source of connectivity. So athletics creates a connection for me. So I have been blessed. I've had the chance to complete 18 marathons. I've had a chance to complete a full Ironman. And for those not familiar, an Ironman's a 2.4-mile swim followed by a 112-mile bike to be completed by a 26.2-mile run. And it takes about 2 years of training. And if you miss a cutoff at any point during the competition, you're immediately disqualified from the race, and there's no exceptions. So I want your viewers to picture something, if they would. I want you to envision what it would be like to dive into a frigid body of water. The water temperature that morning of Lake Coeur d'Alene was 55 degrees. And I want you to imagine—
Where is that?
It's in Idaho,
Idaho.
Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. And I want you to imagine how you would feel to be swimming, but to not be able to communicate with your guide. So as you swim, you keep getting kicked in the face by all the other competitors. You try to surface, but you can't because there's other people immediately above you. And then other swimmers become entangled in the rope that connects you to your guide. And the challenge that you have is that the only way you know which way to go is when you feel a tug at the rope indicating which way you should swim. And otherwise, there's no communication. And the last thing that I think is very problematic is when other swimmers become entangled with the rope, it becomes ensnared and it starts to drag you below the surface of the water. So you start to feel like you're drowning, because in a way you kind of are, because there's an entanglement and someone's entangled with you, so the rope starts taking you below the surface. You try to get oxygen, but it's very difficult because the waves keep pounding, you know, above your head, and you try to lift to get the air, but you can't get it. There's a lesson that comes out of this. The lesson for me is, and again, it's because of my religious background, but it's the idea that God will always give you what you need when you need it. No more, but never any less. And I think if you're able to live with that appreciation, that you'll have what you need when you need it, not more, but no less. You'll find your way through it. So for me, athletic competition has been incredibly significant. I'll tell you something very quick. After my accident, that was one of the hardest things, because at that point I had done 17 marathons and a full Ironman. And that was a real struggle, because for me, athletics allowed me to find my voice. And for all intents and purposes, athletics created my sense of identity. And I used athletics to find strength in getting through my life and finding my way to just cope with my blindness. And then to have all of a sudden had a catastrophic accident where now you're at Mount Sinai Hospital and nurses would have to come and reposition you every 5 to 10 minutes. You couldn't take a shower or use the bathroom. You couldn't put clothes on. You were writhing in horrible pain. Athletics teaches you that discipline of how to deal with life in simple manners and celebrate the simple things. Like celebrate the fact that, you know, you could sit up in bed. Celebrate the fact that you can start to use your walker. Celebrate the fact that you can work through the pain to get to the nurse's station. Celebrate the fact that you can get past the nurse's station and get to the end of the ward. And I'll just tell you very quickly, about a year ago in November, it was time for the New York City Marathon. I had been out of the hospital for a year. I was still dealing with horrible pain from this accident. And I decided that I was going to run the New York City Marathon. It was my 18th marathon, but it was my first marathon running on a shattered hip and a crushed pelvis. And it was the most painful experience I ever had in my entire life. But it had to be done. And when we got to mile 18 and we started running up First Avenue, it was an intense experience, because you realize that even though the body is mortal, that the spirit can overpower the body. And I reached a point where the pain was so significant that I could deal with the pain. I taught myself to do that. But I was fighting just to stay conscious. I was praying that I wouldn't pass out, because what happens is your body just wants you to stop, so it will force you to lose consciousness. And I said, I just have to get over this finish line. And I prayed and I said, God, if you can just give me the strength and the ability to do this, I can work through the pain, but you have to make sure I can stay conscious. And then you realize that that's at that point that you kind of make your peace. Your peace with your new body, your peace with your new circumstance, your peace with your new life, and then you ultimately develop a peace with the Creator. But I think at certain points we all go through that, where the challenge becomes so significant. But ultimately, that's when you find and make your peace with your circumstance, with your life, and ultimately with our Creator.
Have you made peace with the city of New York? I know that you've taken them on over this accident.
That actually is a great question, and the answer to that is that the reason that I am still in litigation with the city of New York, this litigation's gone on now for 2 years, is because I'm not asking for any money. I'm not asking for a dime. I'm not asking for a nickel. I am not asking for a single cent from the city of New York. What I do want them to do is I want them to make Central Park safer. They know how dangerous this is. Central Park is not conforming with the most rudimentary of ADA guidelines that are federally mandated for the city to have to follow. And the simple fact that the city of New York knows that people are getting injured and getting hurt, and they know that if they made these small modifications at very low cost and simply listened to our expert and had our expert work with the Parks Department to make the simple changes that they could make, we can't make the park totally safe, but we can make it safer. Would this accident have happened if these provisions were put in place? Nobody will ever know. But is there a significant chance that it would not have happened? But for the changes the city could make, there's no reason for this to not be done. And I'm just going to tell you something really quick. Since this litigation has been going, where we've been telling the city, look, just make these changes, simply make the park safer, you could enhance and make life better for other people by making it safer, there have been 2 people who have died. 2 deaths have occurred since this litigation has been taking place. And the simple fact is, there's no excuse for the city of New York and for Mayor de Blasio to take the position that he's taking and simply allow for people to get injured and killed when, again, can I say we can make it totally safe? No. But come on, you've had 2 deaths since my accident. And it's basically, if you look at what our complaint goes to, the fact pattern is the same. And the deaths occurred in a similar circumstance. There was one lady, 57-year-old woman, her husband was CBS, 57-year-old woman. Her fact pattern was exactly what we were warning the city was going to happen. Her fact pattern was that she was in the park, she got hit by a speeding cyclist, and it was exactly what we were telling the city of New York was going to happen if they didn't make the changes that they could make. And this lady died. That's bad governance, and there's no excuse for that.
It's surprising in a city as progressive as New York. It makes me wonder about what's going on around the rest of the country.
Well, I think what's really surprising is I think it's more a reflection of Mayor de Blasio. I think what you have is I think you have people who are genuine progressives and who care about people who want to make a difference, and then you have other people like Mayor de Blasio who I don't think really understand what the real meaning of progressive is, and aren't genuine, aren't sincere, and do things more for the headlines than they do for the actual genuine nature of what progressivism is, which is the idea of using governments, using people, and using position to enhance and make life better for the people that you serve. I think it's just bad governance.
We just have about a minute to go. I want to ask you, you've got most of 8 years to go.
Yes.
That would dovetail nicely with running for governor. Any thoughts?
No, I love my job. I will stay at the Michigan Supreme Court so long as the voters allow for me to keep this position. My dream is to stay there for as long as possible. I believe retirement age is at 70, but here's the blessing. My 70th birthday is 5 days after the election that I get to run in at my 69th.
You've thought ahead.
So basically, I should be able to serve till I'm 76 because my goal is I love this job, I love what I get to do, and I want to stay there as long as the voters will allow me.
It would not surprise me if there are Democrats who might have other thoughts about what you should do.
No, I love this job, and I'm going to stay there as long as people let me stay. I want to be at the Hall of Justice and serve the people in this context.
Justice Bernstein, thank you very much for being on City Pulse.
God bless you, and God bless your viewers, and thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you. Well, on that note, everyone have a wonderful weekend. We'll see you next week.